We're finishing up our series on the letters of John with the shortest book in the Bible, 3rd John. And this is a brief letter, but there's a lot of things we could bring out. I'm mainly going to point out 4 things. I'll make some other thoughts, other observations. But 4 things we'll see. One, we'll talk about walking in the truth. We'll see that emphasis by John. Secondly, we'll see this idea of being fellow workers in the truth or for the truth. Just an amazing concept of being fellow workers. And then thirdly, we see the destructive nature of unbiblical leadership in the church. And then finally, we'll talk about what it means, what's the significance of having a good testimony among our brothers and sisters. Let's jump in and look at 3rd John, our last letter in this series. Well, in 1st John, we see John, the apostle, writing to a church who's going through a crisis with people who have left the church, a group of people, and they're being influenced by false teaching. 2nd John, again, John was writing to a church and concerned about false teachers. In this letter, he's writing to an individual named Gaius. And we see, again, the elder is his self-reference. So he doesn't say John, just refers to himself as the elder. So he begins, the elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. So you see this emphasis on his great love and care for Gaius. And you'll see this emphasis also, of course, on the truth. What is he talking about here? Well, the truth, as we'll see, is the gospel message. It is the truth, the apostolic witness about Christ, who he is, and what he's done. And so that it's not just saying that he truly loves him. No, he loves him in truth, in this common commitment, common bond in the truth, the identity of who Christ is. And verse 2, beloved, again, note that emphasis on his great care. It says, I pray that all may go well with you and that you may be in good health as it goes well with your soul. In other words, affirming his spiritual walk. For I rejoiced, verse 3 here, greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. So he has gotten a good report about Gaius. He's letting him know, giving him this encouragement that he's heard this message about him, and he's walking in the truth. In other words, he is living out his faith, right? Verse 4, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. So I think I want to move past this fairly quickly to get through the entire letter, but this phrase is something we want to carry with us. Walking in the truth. Do we reflect a pattern in our life of walking, of living in the truth, living out the truth of the gospel, of who we are in Christ? Is it a pattern? Now, certainly we don't do it perfectly. We don't allow unrepentant sin in our life, though, a pattern of unholiness, right? There should be this pattern, overall character of holiness in our life. Well, let's look at verse 5 here. Beloved, again, that great concern, that great love for Gaius. John says, it is a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. So John has sent out these messengers proclaiming the gospel of who Christ is, the true gospel, and Gaius has received them. He's shown them hospitality, given them a place to stay, support, and then provided for them as he sent them on their way. Keep in mind that hospitality in this first century context would be different than what we think about today. As we talked about with 2nd John, hospitality was, it would be about granting someone a status, transferring them from the status of being a stranger to that of a guest. And so in this first century context, you're kind of giving them, I don't want to say stamp of approval, but you're certainly granting them a greater status than they had were it not for you. And so you provide for them and send them on their way. This message has gotten back to John, and he's wanting Gaius to know that he's heard this and just showing his appreciation for showing the hospitality to his messengers. He says, you will do well. This is just a way of saying, please, you'll do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. And so this other group has gone out, and Gaius is receiving this letter, and he's saying, send this group on in the same way, in a manner that is worthy of those who serve God, in a manner that pleases God. Verse 7, for they have gone out for the sake of the name, for the name of Christ, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. In other words, they're not supported by unbelievers. This is such an important concept in the first century for the church, that the local churches were providing a network of support for one another as these ministries moved about, as these messengers shared the gospel message. In verse 8, he says, therefore we ought to support people like these. And who does he mean by that? People like these, people like my messengers, is what John is saying, who are proclaiming the message of the apostles, right? The true gospel. We should support such people that we may be fellow workers for the truth. In the Greek, it could be in the truth, but you get the idea. Sunergoi is the Greek word there. And I just love that sense of being a fellow worker with people such as these. Now in 2 John, he was talking about false teachers who were roaming about in that area of Ephesus, and he had written to a church to say, don't show hospitality to people like this, who were bringing a false gospel. Eternal consequences are at stake. And so he's saying, if you do that, you're sharing in their evil deeds. But just in the same way that you would be sharing in their evil deeds by supporting people who are proclaiming the true gospel, you are a fellow worker, a sunergoi, for the truth. And how do you be a fellow worker today? You may not be a frontline missionary. You may not be preaching on Sunday. You may not be on staff at a church. But we can support those who are in full-time ministry or are in certain programs who are reflecting the love of Christ. And we can pray for them. We can give our money. We can give our resources in various ways. And this letter challenges us to think about that. What do we have so that we can be fellow workers for the truth? Verse 9, John says, I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, he loves to be first, does not acknowledge our authority. So John is shifting gears here. He's commended Gaius, right? Now he's talking about this guy Diotrephes. And let's look at what Diotrephes is doing. He says he's not acknowledging our authority. So if I come, in the Greek it could be when I come, I will bring up what he's doing. And what is he doing? He's talking wicked nonsense against us. That's what John says. And not content with that alone, he refuses to welcome the brothers. So he's refusing to show hospitality to these messengers that John has sent out. And he's also stopping those who want to, and even putting them out of the church. So he's rejecting the authority of John. He's talking about him, right? He's slandering his name. He's not showing hospitality to John's messengers. And even those in the church, he's hindering them from doing that. And if they do show hospitality, he's casting them out of the church. Now, this is the apostle, John, the beloved disciple, probably the last apostle, certainly one of the last, who is still alive. He's an old man now, certainly along in age, 60-something years probably, past the time of Christ. And this person is rebelling against his legitimate authority. We don't know the relationship between Gaius and Diotrephes. We don't know if they are at the same church. Probably not. Gaius was probably at a small home church, and Diotrephes was probably part of a home church somewhere in that same area in Ephesus. But Diotrephes, whether he has an official role in the church or not, is abusing this authority in the church, bullying people and rebelling against John. And John says here he will confront him. He's going to deal with this issue. And so, again, this letter just as it challenges us to think about how we can be fellow workers, it challenges us to think about what biblical leadership looks like, and to be conscious of abusive leadership, right, that we can see. And you think about Mark 9:35 and the words of Jesus when he draws the 12 disciples to him and he says, "Whoever wishes to be first must be last and servant of all." That's biblical leadership, not Diotrephes, who loves to be first. And then we come to verse 11, and he says, "Beloved," still talking to Gaius, "don't imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God, but whoever does evil has not seen God." Let me say this, obviously our ultimate example is Jesus Christ. And by God's Spirit, as believers, we are growing into the image of Christ. And yet we also will look to role models to emulate. Whether it's conscious or not, we tend to emulate people. So it's helpful to think about, who are you emulating? And ideally, it's good to find someone who, although imperfect, they are more mature in their walk with Christ, and we can look to them as an example. And so John is saying, be careful about imitating people, right? Don't imitate evil, but imitate good. And we see this with Paul. Paul calls on those to imitate those in the church to imitate him. So again, our ultimate example is Christ, but we do look to others as role models, and we become role models for others. And that's something to think about as well. People are maybe looking to you, and we need to be aware of that. And then he turns to someone named Demetrius, and Demetrius is likely the one bringing the letter. And he says, Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone. And notice what he says here. He points out 3 different areas that affirm Demetrius, commend Demetrius. He says he's received a good testimony from everybody, the whole church, from the truth itself. In other words, when you have the truth as the bar, when you hold Demetrius's actions, his life against that bar, it affirms that he is indeed living out his faith. And then thirdly, he says, we also, John and others with him, add our testimony concerning Demetrius. And you know that our testimony is true. And so he's commending Demetrius, who's bringing this letter. He is a stranger to Gaius. And so this is part of commending the person you're sending, right? But think about the importance, the significance of having a good testimony among our brothers and sisters. This isn't about seeking approval or doing things because others are watching. No, a good witness, a good testimony is just a product of walking in the truth. It's about living our life in the context of a new community of faith, right, where we are to encourage one another and hold each other accountable. And so, again, this letter challenges us in another way to ask, what is our testimony among the brothers and sisters? And why is it important to have a good reputation, a good testimony from others, right? What would others say about you? And then we have the final greetings. Verse 13, John says, I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. And we see this similar ending in 2 John. But you hear the words of a pastor who loves Gaius and he loves this church. And he says, I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Verse 15, peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends, each by name. A beautiful letter, again, affirming the importance of walking in the truth, the message of the gospel, the reality of who Christ is, challenging us to look at our lives and see how we can be fellow workers in that truth. It warns us of the destructive nature of abusive leadership in the church when we see Diotrephes, who loves to put himself first, rather than that biblical calling of being a servant to others. Right? If you want to be first, then you are last of all, and a servant of all. And then fourthly, the significance of a good testimony among the brothers and sisters. Well, there are lesson notes in the description. They're free PDF that covers what we've talked about. And I do that with all the videos in this series. If you're just coming to this series, there are, I think, 25 videos that cover 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, just walking through them devotionally, verse by verse. And I'll put a link to the playlist as well in the description. I do hope you found this helpful. Thanks for watching.